Thank you so much for tuning into Horrible People Podcast. I'm Jenn McDonald, and the horrible person that I'm speaking with today is Doug Chiasson. Doug, would you mind giving us a little overview about who you are and where you come from? Just so that you guys are aware, I met Doug because of the outdoor symposium at Parliament Hill this summer. It was awesome, super educational. So Doug.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Doug Chiasson. My day job is I'm the executive director of the Fur Institute of Canada and the Seals and Sealing Network. We're the national advocacy organization for the fur trade here in Canada, as well as the seal hunt. I'm coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia today, born and raised in Cape Breton, but live in Halifax now.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I was in Halifax a couple of years ago and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it's a great city.
It is. So the fur trade and trapping, is that something you have always been into? Like, is this a lifelong thing or did you kind of get into it later on in life?
So I'd say I got into it later on in life. I ended up here at the Institute about 2.5 years ago. But once upon a time, when I was younger and had much less gray in my beard, despite only being in my early 30s right now, I was a political hack on Parliament Hill. I advised the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans on, amongst other things, the seal hunt. So I got to know the Institute and the Seals and Sealing Network through that work. And then fast forward 10 years down the road, they were looking for a new executive director. And the outgoing executive director, who was a buddy of mine, reached out to me and he's like, "Hey, come take this job. I know you want this job. Come take this job." So, I mean, I've always been, intrigued and fascinated by, the history of the fur trade and the politics around the seal hunt. My first university paper was written about the seal hunt, so it's certainly been an interest of mine. But I didn't grow up in the business. I'll put it that way.
Okay. Did you grow up like hunting or outdoors?
Yeah, like I grew up as a redneck kid living in a little town, middle of nowhere. A little town called Marguerite, salmon fishing town in Cape Breton, like a couple hundred people. I did my grade 4 science fair project on snaring rabbits, so it's there's a certain degree of when you grow up in a community like that, you never really. There's no way to not be around hunting, be around trapping, be around the outdoors.
Absolutely. You're always into it. That's true. And did you do a little bit of work with WWF?
I did, yeah. So before, to the confusion of many, immediately before I came to the Fur Institute, I worked at the World Wildlife Fund for 6 years. I ran a fisheries development program in Nunavut. So I got to spend a lot of time out in remote Inuit communities in Nunavut, working with them on developing community-based fisheries, spending a lot of time on land and out on the water and hunting seals. So it was some really amazing experiences that I was lucky enough to have for 6, I think it was about 6 years.
Because I mean, they're primarily seen as like an animal rights group, which is amazing because I mean, I'm as an animal lover, all for animal rights groups that actually base their policy off of fact and not monetary.
Yeah, and I mean the thing I would say about WWF, and I guess I don't have any WWF swag around me right now. I usually have my WWF water bottle.
Oh, cool.
Because they gave me a really good water bottle for Christmas one year. It's still kicking like 5 years later. Is at their core they're a conservation organization. And depending on where they are in the world, and it's a global organization, they're in 100 and some countries at any given time. WWF supported the Canadian seal hunt. WWF supports in certain cases, fly fishing, angling resorts and trophy hunting operations and community-based conservation that involves hunting or either recreational hunting or subsistence-based hunting, which used to get me in a lot of trouble with some of my colleagues at like WWF Netherlands or some of the other parts of the network that were a bit more on the animal rights side of things, or a bit closer to, the International Fund for Animal Welfare and other big multinational, like hardcore animal rights anti-use groups.
Okay.
But we had something that not many other conservation organizations did when I worked in the Arctic, was we could point to the fact that we supported the seal hunt. So in Nunavut, there's a word that's used as like a pejorative for environmentalists, and it's silati, and it means defenders. And it's like used in a sarcastic sense of like, oh, silati, whatever. Talking about Greenpeace and others, because their experience with environmentalists is like, these are the people that want to stop us from hunting whales. These are the people that want to stop us from hunting seals. I was in an airport in Kikatarjuak one day waiting for my flight back to Iqaluit, and there was a guy in the airport, and he was like, "Hey, you're the Sulati. You're from WWF." I was like, "Yeah, I'm from WWF." And he's like, "You want to come here and stop us from hunting seals?" I said, I don't want to stop that. And I reached into my pocket and pulled out my sealskin keychain. and he was like, oh, okay. And then we had a great big chat about hunting and about fishing. And, it really was a way to, help set us apart when I worked there, to point to the fact that we weren't anti-animal harvest the way that a lot of other groups were.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised to hear that, because I was surprised to hear that they were pro seal hunt, pro, harvesting. But I understand why they're pro seal hunt, and I feel like a lot of people don't. A lot of hunters that I speak to this side of Canada, like Ontario onwards, I don't think are as informed or familiar with the seal hunt, and there are
Yeah.
so many misconceptions and everything around it. I brought up the seal hunt to a couple of friends a few years ago because they were talking like, you know what, I like hunting, but I'm not going to go after animals that shouldn't be hunted. And they specifically mentioned seals. And I was like, whoa, whoa. Like, let's backtrack on that. So can you maybe touch on, just to educate everyone that's listening,
Sure.
because like the misconceptions around the seal hunt and why it's a good thing?
Yeah, so the biggest misconception people have about the seal hunt is that we hunt baby seals. First and foremost, cute white, white baby seals like this one.
Little babies there.
That's what we hunt. It's been
For
illegal
anyone
to
listening,
hunt.
he held up a cute little.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Sorry for folks who are on audio.
I
I have a little ceramic white coat seal. I think it was a planter at some
It's
point.
very cute.
That someone bought for me as a joke, I think, when I worked for the minister. So essentially, we don't hunt baby seals. White coat baby, the ones you see in all of the ads from everybody that's against hunting seals, all the anti-seal hunting groups, IFAW, HSUS, Greenpeace, everybody else. It's been illegal to hunt white coat baby seals since 1987 in Canada. So it's not even a case of, well, we could, but we don't do it anymore. It's literally illegal to do. So, we hunt seals that are young. I'm not going to dispute that fact, but these are independent animals that have left their mother. They're, for all intents and purposes, an individual. They're no longer part of the family unit. They're individual
Like they're weaned
animals.
and self-sustaining.
They're weaned. They're self-sustaining. They're able to swim. The only difference between them and an adult seal is that they're smaller. And even within that, there's now a greater variance of ages of seals hunted, because different ages of seals are hunted for different reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the first biggest one. The second one that we run into, I'd say less in Canada, but especially internationally, is seals are endangered. And seals are far from, I should say, with a couple very particular caveats, seals are very far from endangered. The harp seal, that's the primary seal that's the target of the seal hunt. The population is somewhere between 4.5 and 7.5 million animals.
And that impacts the fisheries and everything, right? Like that impacts
absolutely
the environment greatly, I think.
So, we can't have 7 million animals that are a couple hundred pounds that are very flexible predators that basically will eat whatever they can get their mouth on, and have it not have an effect on the marine ecosystem. So, we've done some work to calculate, how much does the herd eat, or the overall seal population in the Northwest Atlantic eat in the course of a year, and the commercial fishery pales in comparison. Depending on what numbers you use, somewhere between like 46 times to 53 times the total catch of the commercial fleet is eaten by seals every year.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So and we've seen incredible growth in that population. In the 70s, we were below, we were down to maybe 100,000, 200,000 if we're lucky, harp seals. There
Okay.
was a very legitimate conservation concern, and it was interesting to see. I was born for another 40 years, but 30 years. But the evolution of like the initial anti-seal protests were about like, you're going to kill all the seals and there's going to be none left.
Hmm.
And we were kind of headed there. And I mean, it wasn't just us as Canada. You had distant water fleets from Norway and from the Soviet Union, East
Okay.
Germany. Were all here hunting seals, because this was before the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. We only had control of 12 miles out from the nearest point of land.
Okay.
So, whereas now we have control of 200 kilometers from the nearest point of land. So there were a whole lot of great big factory boats from all over the world that were hunting seals in the Northwest Atlantic. And we were down to a couple thousand, as low as some estimates are 3,000, 6,000 gray seals. We now have 500,000. Like the
Wow.
ability of these animals to rebound from a very low number comparatively. 100,000 seals is still a lot of seals, but it's pretty spectacular. Those first rounds of anti-sealing protest were, similar to endangered species protests. They were like, you're gonna catch the last one,
Okay.
and very quickly it morphed into animal rights. You guys are evil because baby seals are cute. Not, you guys are evil because you're gonna get rid of all of the seals.
Yeah, and the fact that they are so cute, it's so easy to throw that picture up, throw up a
Oh yeah.
video of a seal getting clubbed, which is another thing that's a huge.
Oh yeah, red blood and white ice makes for very, very compelling visuals.
That's it.
There's enough communications and marketing and public relations classes around the world that use those, especially the big anti-sealing campaigns of the 80s, as like case studies for their students, because they're like, this is, they started out with like really compelling visuals and a really easy story to communicate, and they turned that into billions of dollars of support over the next however many 30-40 years.
Yeah, and we see it with, the anti-gun groups too. They'll use situations, I mean, in Canada, they'll use American incidents, or they'll use firearms that we don't even own or don't even exist
Yeah.
sometimes to try and make a case. And yeah, it's just really sad the way they play on people's, I don't want to say ignorance because that's kind of turned into a negative word in a sense, but people's lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not to say that there isn't room to improve, and we've shown that in the Canadian seal hunt and in trapping as well. That with the proper motivation and with investment, we can improve the way we do things. Like,
Okay.
ironically, coming back to WWF, the process by which we kill seals, like the legal process, this is how you have to do it, was developed by a group of international veterinary experts. And that panel of veterinary experts was funded by the WWF.
That's big.
Like the WWF was like, you guys are taking up way too much oxygen in the room about this friggin' seal hunt stuff when there's like millions of them. We're concerned about like, there's like 17 rhinos left. Can we talk about the rhinos? We'll
Yeah.
pay for them to figure out the best way to kill a seal, the most humane way to kill a seal. Let's fix that problem, because the problem isn't that they're killing seals, because there's loads of them.
Hmm.
So let's deal with this humane piece, and then the rest of you can shut up and we can talk about the real issues that are
Real issues.
facing
Yep.
wildlife around the world.
Oh my God. It
And
seems like that's an issue.
unfortunately, it hasn't quite played out that way. But an interesting approach to be taken by an organization with the reputation that WWF has, of just like, we're going to be the adults in the room
Yeah.
and actually put our money where our mouth is and try and fix this.
So do you know what conclusion that panel of veterinarians came up with the most humane way to
Yeah,
dispatch a seal?
so this was back in the early 2000s.
Okay.
So the process, I don't know how gruesome you want me to get here. I can
Get
get
gruesome. People need to know.
so we call it the three-step process, and there's a three-step process to killing a seal humanely, and this is built right into the marine mammal regulations under the Fisheries Act. This is the only legal way for commercial seal harvesters to kill seals, and it's you have to either shoot them or club them or hit them with a hack pick in the head. That is the stun phase. You then have to be someone has to be hands-on with that animal and palpate the skull and feel both sides of the brain of the head and see if both sides of the brain have been compromised, so that we can reasonably say that they are now at the very least brain dead.
Not
and
suffering.
then and then the third step is the bleeding step. Is you take a knife, and there's two large veins or arteries that run right under the flippers, and
Okay.
you cut those two blood vessels, and that bleeds the animal.
So that's where you get those overhead shots of a
Yeah,
seal
and that's
bleeding
where
out
you
on the
get
wall.
these overhead shots of a big red splotch on the ice and someone there butchering a seal in the middle of it. Is, we often say, and it's not to take a shot at our good friends in animal agriculture, but it's, there's no picture windows on slaughterhouses.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
And that's the thing, is you get a helicopter sitting a couple 100 feet over you with like HD 4K cameras taking pictures of you slaughtering a seal. Like, it's not pretty.
It's not going to look good unless people are educated about it and know why you're doing what you're doing. I mean,
Exactly. And it's
yeah.
it's a higher standard than, you know basically any other wild animal harvest we have, because it was to hold it to a higher standard. Like, that was the purpose, was let's
Yeah.
hold this to a higher standard.
And it's species specific, so it takes into account, like, I guess their anatomy and
Well,
what
that's
they.
it. Is these were all things that were put together considering the fact that seals have a very different anatomy than an ungulate or something like that. So it it certainly addressed the issues of, can you kill a seal humanely, but all of the groups that were anti-sealing still said, well, they were just like, well, it's impossible to do it humanely because it's ice and it's moving and there's too many moving pieces, and also at the core of it, we just don't want you to be allowed to do this anymore. So we will continue to come up with arguments as to why you shouldn't be able to do it, regardless of how much you do.
Especially when the humane method, which is a legitimate humane method, doesn't look or sound so great.
Exactly. Like that's that at the end of the day, and this is true of, just about any hunting outside of maybe bird hunting, right? It's
Yep.
not pretty to butcher a moose, right? It's not pretty to butcher a sheep. It's not pretty.
Oh, exactly.
These are all things that happen, hundreds of thousands of times across the North American, millions of times across the North American landscape every year. But there's no helicopter from IFAW, hovering right
Exactly.
over it when it happens.
Like, if a white-tailed deer looked as cute as a seal and people saw me like quartering it up in the
Oh,
bush
yeah,
somewhere, there would be public outrage. But yeah,
exactly.
exactly. People don't see it, and organizations aren't being paid to fight against it.
Not yet. Hopefully, none of them are watching right now, because they're
Yeah,
like, "Wait, I got an
exactly.
idea now."
Probably. Oh God. I'm not giving these people any ideas. You did mention that there's different ages, like different ages you would harvest a seal at for different reasons. So are there are the main, like, I guess, oh, I should ask, I shouldn't guess. What are the main reasons for harvesting seal? Like food, fur?
Sure. So, I mean, depending on where you're at, like certainly Inuit harvesters, other indigenous harvesters in the north are primarily harvesting for food.
Okay,
So they're targeting larger animals,
fair.
ergo older animals, for the most part. So once you get down into the kind of quote unquote commercial seal hunt, the primary target for the commercial seal hunt is the skin,
Okay.
the for fur and leather products. But a growing part of that industry is also the oil. So seal oil is a great nutraceutical product, great nutritional supplement
Hmm.
for omega-3 fatty acids, similar to fish oil or cod liver oil or whatever else. It's great for people. It's great for pets. We've got some of our members who are doing quite a bit of work now to promote the use of seal oil as a nutritional supplement for pets because it does great things for their coats, does great things for their joints. We're working on a clinical trial right now for seal oil and pets to that hopefully we'll be able to talk about more in a couple months,
Wow.
and to the point of being able to have seal oil be like prescribed by veterinarians
Oh, awesome.
to treat particular conditions. So it's and I mean at this point people spend more on their dogs than they do on their kids, so it's the
Absolutely.
market to be in.
It is.
So there is some small meat harvest, I would say, in Newfoundland, but it's very
Oh,
traditional, very community based. So
okay.
it's not like this is not a food production industry
Okay.
yet, or right now, I guess. In years past it has been at times. In the future it probably will be again, because we have an
Okay.
enormous amount of incredibly healthy wild protein that's just not being harvested right now.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've never tried seal, but do you think, like, I assume you've tried it, and is it something that you think people would get into? Like, does it taste
Oh yeah, like seal meat if handled correctly. And this
like
is
all wild game?
like all wild game. It's, we've all heard the people that say they won't eat Canada goose, or they won't eat bear meat, or they
Yes.
won't, oh, bear
The
meat's it's
comment I
gamey and
get
it's whatever. It's like, no, well, just handle your bear properly. You can't
cook
shoot a bear
properly.
and throw it in the back of a truck. That's just not how this
Hack
works.
off a slice and throw it in the pan. Exactly.
Yeah, so like all things, if treated properly, it's absolutely delicious. And at this point, I've eaten seal meat just about every way I think that there
So
is.
cool.
I've eaten it raw and frozen. I've eaten it like in tataki. I've eaten it in stews. I've eaten it in lasagna. I've eaten it in spring rolls. I've eaten,
You can do
I
anything.
yeah, it's very versatile if used properly,
Okay.
and it can be quite good. And from a nutritional standpoint, it's incredible. It's super high in iron, super high in magnesium, a couple other
Hmm,
nutrients where it's very very high in
very healthy.
niacin, vitamin A. Um, it's it's really good for you. But the thing that makes it very attractive for and of great interest to like Inuit or other people who are out on the land in the cold is because it's so high in niacin. It gives you that like niacin flush. You feel really warm when you eat it.
Oh,
So I've been at like, fancy receptions in Ottawa, in a suit and sealskin tie, and I'm like eating eating seal meat, sorry, and I'm like eating not really paying attention to how much I've been eating, and then I'm like, I'm so hot.
getting hot flashes.
Yeah, basically you're getting hot flashes from eating it.
Wow, I did not know that. That's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so
That would
it's
be a good
I would
tool to
love
have.
for more people to be able to access seal meat, for more people to be able to, go down to your specialty butcher and
Yeah.
get seal meat. Like I don't think it's something that, just a piece of seal meat on a styrofoam tray with some cellophane over it probably isn't going to attract a whole lot of people. It's very dark, like it's black basically.
Really?
Yeah, so it's because they're diving animals, they have to be able to hold a lot of oxygen in their muscle tissue. So, similar to like a diving duck. You
Okay.
open up a
Yeah.
diving duck and they're like super dark. Seal
Yeah.
meat is like a whole nother degree darker than a diving
Wow.
duck. Yeah, like
That
it's
makes sense.
basically black, which can make for some really interesting, high-end restaurant platings that look
That would
wild and
look
crazy.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Now you also work with like predator management, trapping,
Yep.
like the fur bearing animals, all of that. Um, and I had seen that you were a witness in Parliament on Bill C-21, and
Yes.
for anyone that's not, I know not everyone's in tune with what all the bills mean, but Bill C-21 was that mess that prohibited handguns,
Yep.
prohibited most future semi-automatics, and I think it just caused a world of issues with trappers, right? Like,
Yeah, it certainly did. Trappers were one of the particular groups that are carved out for use of handguns.
yeah,
In the firearms regulations, there's a sub bullet for particularly for trappers. Trappers can be granted an ATC, an authorization to carry, for use in trapping. And that use is primarily for like dispatch of animals that are caught in traps, because we have killing traps and we have restraining traps that hold an animal in one place until you get back there, and you can choose to release it or you can choose to dispatch it. And for folks that aren't familiar with trapping, is picture the deepest darkest woods, and you're on a snow machine and you've got a backpack full of gear, and you've got big trap setting pliers, and you've got a bunch of snares hanging off the back of your backpack, then trying to shoulder along or a long gun on top of that is not exactly the most convenient
no,
or effective or safe way to do things. So trappers were recognized as being like, oh, hey, there are legitimate uses for people to use handguns, and this is one of them. But with C-21, that will basically disappear. It doesn't strike the section of the regulations. It'll still be on the books, but for all intents and purposes, trappers will no longer really be able to use their handguns at ranges and things like that. So they won't be well practiced in the field. So all it does is create a less safe environment for trappers.
exactly. No, I totally understand that. And I mean, I know there are trappers that do have their ATC, like authorization to carry. And I feel like they're going to have a really, really hard time replacing their products
Yeah.
if they need to replace parts or the product altogether, because retailers can't just carry a stock of handguns for such a small demographic.
Well, that's it. Is the reality being there's about 40,000, maybe 45,000 trappers in the country right now. Of that, there's only a fairly small subset that actually had ATCs, because for you know men and women that are trapping in the open prairie, trapping coyotes or trapping fox, the open prairie, it's not as necessary to the compact nature of being able to carry a handgun on your belt or on your chest, versus if you're driving up to your traps in your pickup,
Yeah,
you don't really need it's the arguments are less convincing anyway, I'll put it that way,
you're
for
not
why you
going through
can't
like
use
the
a long
deep
gun.
woods on
Yeah,
foot.
you're not in deepest darkest woods in northern Ontario, for
Yeah.
example. So, or you're not on a long range trip out on the land in the tundra of Northwest Territories, where it's you don't want the extra 2 pounds of carrying the long gun versus carrying your sidearm,
And
your
they're
handgun.
awkward to
So,
carry.
well, this is it, and especially in areas in grizzly bear country, in wolf country, in cougar country, where Wolverine country even, because Wolverines are the scariest animal. Uh, and the reality of certain trappers where they were carrying a 22 for dispatch, because you want to make the smallest possible hole in that animal because you
Yeah.
want to minimize damage to the fur, and also something of a heavier caliber for self-defense.
Fair. Yeah, you would need both, right?
Yeah, so now you're getting off your snow machine with your giant backpack and your snares and your setting tools and all this stuff, and two long guns. And you have to
Yeah.
be able to think in the moment, wait, which is on my right shoulder, which is on my left, the bear's coming across
And
the
a quick
beaver dam
decision
at
when
me.
you have an animal charging at you.
Yeah, so it's certainly one of those things where I've spoken to trappers that say that they will feel less safe, and
Yeah.
regardless of the regardless of you can use bear spray instead of a handgun, or you can do X instead of Y, or whatever, is they will feel less safe. And
I
for
think,
people that are
yeah,
often alone in the middle of the woods, these are not the people that are causing our crime statistics to go through the roof, right? When
not
you
even a
go to
little bit.
Fur Harvester's auction house in North Bay, which is the last remaining wild fur auction in North America,
Oh,
on the side of the building, there's a great big billboard that says, kids who hunt, fish, and trap don't mug little old ladies. And it's like it's not 100% true, but it's probably like 98% true.
I'd
So
say, yeah, 98.5% true.
so that's the thing, is that, if our goal is to make society safer, why are we choosing to make a particular subset of society less safe?
All for an effective.
To make people feel good about themselves.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can definitely see how having a pistol holstered when a bear is coming at you is so much easier to just drop what's in your hands, and they're properly trained, so to draw your pistol. Like, these people aren't going out there without training or anything like that.
No, that's it. It's and like I say, it is still a fairly small subset of even of trappers that choose to do this. So it's not that even doing this removes, 15,000 handguns from the landscape or something, even if the
Yeah,
government was just trying to run up the numbers,
yeah,
right?
that's
Like
true.
at the core of it, this affects maybe 1,000 people, maybe a couple
That's
thousand people.
such a small. Yeah, there should have been some sort of like amendment made or something to.
And we tried, like we
Yeah,
certainly, and I testified at the Senate committee. I met with members of the House committee and the Senate committee when it was met with the House committee when it was still in the House, and then met with Senate committee members when it was in the Senate, and said, it's not that much to carve us out.
yeah.
And if you're going to carve out the Olympic sport shooters, work with us to figure out how we get carved out.
Hmm.
And there was little to no interest in seeing that happen from members who could actually
Do
affect change
something.
to the bill.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would have been such a smart exemption. Like, it's so easy to defend that these people are out deep woods. I mean, you're restricted to what you can carry, when you can carry it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had one conversation with, out of respect for them, I will leave them unnamed, but someone fairly senior positioned in the government. And I had gotten I had sent a letter and got redirected around to them, and they said, we didn't even think of trappers. I'm like,
And it's insane. Like, it's these people that just don't, because we see that so often. I mean,
yeah,
even with the organization that I work with, CSAAA, we recently spoke to an Arcan because they were putting restrictions on gunpowders and reactive targets. And when we spoke to them, we're like, why was the industry not consulted? Because, I mean, you're not even thinking of the fact that people that do historical reenactments, they don't generally have a PAL. They've got antique firearms. They
right.
don't need a PAL, but now they need a PAL to buy the powders for their gun. And they're like, oh, you know what? We didn't even think about the industry. We didn't even think about these reenactors. We didn't think about any of these people. And this is why actual consultation needs to be done.
Yeah, and like I've said this different. I mean, I spent 4.5 years in the belly of the beast working on Parliament Hill, so like I have some degree of empathy for the people that don't. They ask the department, what's going on, and the department says, well, here's who should be concerned, and you go out and talk
Yes.
to those people, and then that's it. But for stuff like this, you have to go and shake some trees and really sort out, like, okay, this is affecting handgun users. Who are all of the handgun users in Canada?
Yeah.
Like, who is that? Who is every single person?
You need a list of every little niche that's going to be impacted.
Exactly. And you can then make a considered decision to not listen to them, frankly. But
Like,
I would rather be in a position where someone tells me, "Oh, we don't care about trappers. We thought about it. We thought that we understand that this affects you, but we don't care. We have bigger priorities at play.
this is our mandate. Like,
This is our mandate. The voters told us they want this to happen." Then for them to come back to be like, "We didn't even think of you guys."
well, exactly, because then you're thinking, what if you did think about us? Would there be an exemption?
Yeah, well, this is it, and I've dealt with this on some other legislation that's kicking around in the Senate right now around fur farming, or that like will have an effect on fur farming, because we represent trappers, we represent seal hunt, we also represent fur farmers, we represent the entire fur industry here in Canada.
Yes.
And a couple pieces of legislation that started as talking about zoos and very quickly got kind of expanded into talking about captivity of animals. And I'm like, wait a minute. Captivity of animals starts to now is of great interest to us, but you brought forward this amendment at the committee stage after you had heard from witnesses. So when you were hearing from witnesses, this bill was only about, in this particular case, Bill S-15, this bill was about great apes and elephants in zoos. So
Oh,
I didn't
wow.
feel the need to write a letter to the committee and tell them that we are very concerned that this bill is going to hurt mink farming, because mink are not elephants or great apes.
Yeah.
But then they amend the bill to say, "Oh, this is about captivity of potentially all non-domesticated animals." And there is a certain amount of scientific debate as to whether mink are domesticated or not. Our position certainly is that they are domesticated, but
Okay.
I would rather just have this be sorted out and have us go to committee and testify and say, "Here are our concerns."
Yeah. And I think a point you made there is also people need to kind of pay attention to what's happening, because bills can change direction so quickly. You think, this isn't going to impact me. And overnight, there could be a slight change that just drastically changes your world.
And I mean, and it's hard for small organizations like ours, and I'm sure like yours, that at the end of the day, I have, like, depending on how you count us, like 2.5 people.
Yeah.
In my organization. So we can't necessarily be monitoring every Senate committee meeting about elephants on the off chance that it maybe affects us.
Might impact something you guys. Yeah. Who would have even thought that elephants in zoos would start touching on to mink farms?
Yeah. So like these are the wild and crazy ways that some of these things can take shape. And monitoring the Canada Gazette and seeing species at risk listings, it's like, oh wait, there's a new species at risk listing for the eastern wolf. Okay, now I have to go talk to 2 provincial trappers associations and 2 provincial governments and write a letter and look at their letters. And if it wasn't for the fact that we saw this coming, we would be very much behind the 8 ball. So
yeah, playing catch up. And
yeah,
no, totally.
And then the folks on the other side of these debates are far better resourced and far better staffed than we are. So it's kind of the interesting one thing that I talk about a lot in kind of anti-fur movements and the evolution of the anti-fur movement.
Yeah, which is something I really wanted to touch on, because I am an animal lover. But when I was younger, I was very young, so uninformed, and I was just like, oh my God, fur is like the worst thing.
Fur is murder, right?
That's it, exactly.
It's I mean, I'm an animal lover too. I particularly love the ones that make nice looking coats.
Yeah.
So
you love them so much you wear them.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm a member of PETA, people eating tasty animals. So the evolution of the anti-fur movement over, say, the last 50 years is you had a very insurgent grassroots level movement going up against the great fashion houses of the world and against multi-million, multi-billion-dollar corporations. So it was really easy to be the plucky upstart animal rights NGO and talk about the big evil capitalists, the big evil corporate boardrooms, and people smoking cigars and
all those, yeah,
drinking
higher ups.
champagne from crystal glasses. But like in today, it's kind of flipped that PETA and IFAW and HSUS are like multi hundreds of millions, if not $billion corporations.
Mm-hmm.
They're still not for profits or charities or both, but they're at the core of them. They're large
The funding they
multinational
receive is
organizations,
unreal.
and the people fighting against them are trappers associations or small business owners, people that own a family fur shop that's been in their family for a few generations in Montreal. They're not that I'm saying there aren't any big corporations still in fur. Certainly the LVMH group, Louis Vuitton group, still has interests in fur and still produces a lot of great fur garments. But it's certainly here in North America, anti-fur protesters are like attacking small business owners and attacking Indigenous people, attacking women. It's really
people.
not, there's like really interesting ways to turn this back around on people and kind of make them question the way that they think about their own advocacy. And by and large, it's not a hard and fast rule, but by and large, anti-fur people are progressive or left-wing.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so you're against fur, so you are against Indigenous trappers making more money. They're like, well, no, I'm not against Indigenous people. And they're like, okay, so you're anti-fur, so you're pro-oil and gas. Well, what do you mean? Like, well, if I can't buy a coat made of fur, I have to buy a coat made of polyester or nylon or some kind of synthetic. And they're like, oh, I'm not oil and gas. And they're like, well, the modern anti-fur movement built its reputation by throwing red paint on, women's fur coats.
Mm-hmm.
So you're anti-women. And they're like, well, no, I'm not anti-woman. I'm like, so you're anti-Indigenous, you're anti-environment, and you're anti-woman. And they're like, wait a minute, maybe I'm pro-fur.
Yeah, I mean, if you break it down that way, I think that lets them sort of see the other side and the benefits to the fur industry.
Yeah, like it's really interesting to watch. I will say that things in Canada, I mean, we have the out always of like the heritage and history of Canada, and certainly the having a different environmental ethic and a different relationship with Indigenous peoples than they do in the States. In the States, anti-fur is violence. Like it's farm break-ins and it's smashing windows at furriers.
Really?
And
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised because that is how the more far left protesters tend to react.
Yeah, like it's very violent. I'm not saying these things never happen in Canada, just they are rarer in Canada. But one of the big anti-fur groups in the States that's particularly targeting fur farming is called the Final Nail. And it's like, your imagery is a little bit on the nose there, bud. Like the final nail in the coffin. Like, okay, this is
that's so weird.
Like let's simmer down here for a minute, and we can have a well-reasoned debates about the pros and cons of fur farming. But like, let's not. This is a little bit creepy. You're taking pictures of people's farms.
Morbid.
And they're like posting obituaries of if someone who's like a prominent fur farmer passes away, they're like, hey, one more down.
And like you see that so much, not just with fur, but with anything that the mainstream media, government tries to tell people that they should hate. Like it almost gives them a pass to be just disgusting and aggressive and violent towards people that they just don't understand.
Exactly. And it's, I have some of my members that are retailers or manufacturers. They get people come into the store and, give them shit for selling fur. And they're like, come in and talk. Like, let's have a conversation.
Like
and
you
can see me as a human being instead of some kind of evil creature that you've had this image implanted in your head of what I am and what I do.
And it totally, yeah, like you kind of touched on there, it totally dehumanizes that person.
Absolutely. Like so much of my work is about destigmatizing fur
I love that.
and trying to get back to the point that we were at 40, 50 years ago. Like I saw a news report not long ago. And this has nothing to do with the fur business, but everything to do with the fur business. And it was about Portage and Maine in Winnipeg. And like Portage and Maine, you can't cross the road at level, you have to go underneath. And the government built this like tunnel underneath Portage and Maine in the 70s. And now it's every 10 years there's a big debate about whether they should put a crosswalk back at Portage and Maine or not.
Okay.
And I saw a news report from when they opened the tunnel under Portage and Maine. And it was, CBC or CTV, whoever, out there just like interviewing people on the street, being like, did you know that the tunnel was open today and you're not allowed to walk across the street anymore? What do you think of that? And, I'm watching this report and it's, the first lady they interview is wearing a fox coat. Second lady they interview is wearing a shearling coat. They interview a guy, he's wearing a sheared beaver coat. Like everyone was wearing fur. A hat
Huh.
or gloves with a cuff on them, or a coat or a vest or something. And it was just what people wore. Like these were normal people going to work, at
Okay.
an insurance company or Manitoba Hydro or whatever. Like it's not like
Sure.
this was some kind of
They weren't trappers.
highfalutin event, or this wasn't a trappers convention they were interviewing. Like it was people on their way to work on a
Regular everyday people.
Monday. And regular everyday people were wearing a lot of fur. And it was because you could buy it and it would last, right? It wasn't fast fashion.
Yeah.
You were dealing with people a generation removed from the Great Depression, and it was, here, you buy this coat, it'll last you for 20 years, or it'll last you, and you can give it to your daughter, give it to your son.
Oh yeah, like fur
Well,
coats are passed down.
yeah, they're heirlooms in many cases. And a lot of my members now are providing services to people like, hey, take your grandmother's coat. It's old fashioned, like it's just not the current look,
Yeah.
but bring in your grandmother's fur coat. We can make some modifications, we can remodel it,
Oh, that's so
we can
nice.
make it something that will work for you, shorten it or make it a vest or whatever, or we can make it into throw pillows, we can make it into a blanket, we can make it into teddy bears for your kids, for their your grandmother's grandkids.
Oh wow.
There's a
That's really
lot
good.
of great work that folks are doing to try and, if nothing else, get those coats out of people's closets and find a way for people to get those jackets back out into the sunlight, whether it's sunlight as a teddy bear, or sunlight as a bag, or sunlight as a vest or a hat.
Yeah, just so it's not
Because
collecting
it's
dust.
just, well, yeah, it's sad that so many coats across the country are sitting at the back of someone's closet that at some point someone paid good money for.
Definitely. And that's a good quality piece of clothing that, yeah, could be
Yeah.
repurposed and made into something more modern.
Oh, exactly. They were some kind of handmade item that was specialty artisan craft for the
Yeah.
most part. That's something too that I think a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate as much as I would like them to. I mean, there's a lot of things people don't appreciate as much as I would like them to. Is, if you go to a furrier, like a real furrier here in Canada, and there's not nearly as many of them as there used to be. There's big parts of the country where there are none to be found, which is sad. In the entire Maritimes, there's not a single operating furrier.
Really?
Yeah, like it's truly disappointing. We used to have like 6 in Nova Scotia alone, and now there's
Yeah, I kind
none
of
in Nova
assumed that would be a
Scotia.
big.
Yeah, none in Nova Scotia, none in PEI, none in New Brunswick. So, and I mean, I'm trying to think. There's certainly cities in Ontario that don't have them.
Mhm.
Manitoba has, I think, 2 in the entire province. Saskatchewan has like 1 in the entire province.
Wow.
So it's really about, those people were, making these coats in the back room or the upstairs of the showroom. So if you wanted to, you could go in and go upstairs or go to the back and see how these things were getting made. And as with all things manufacturing, certainly manufacturing in Canada is not as easy or cost effective as it once was.
Yeah.
And fur, as with many other things, a lot of manufacturing has moved to other parts of the world. But there is still a core of knowledge here in Canada about working with fur, especially working with wild fur, that is an experience you're not really going to get with many other things in the course of your day.
Yeah.
If you're buying from like a local cheesemaker or a local blacksmith or something, maybe. But to be able to actually go in the back, and every furrier I know anyway, if someone comes into the store, they want to give them the tour and
Oh,
show them
good.
all about everything they do. And here's the showroom, and here's some other thing. What are you interested in? What can I put you in? Try this coat. Try this coat. Try this coat.
Very inviting.
Oh yeah, incredibly inviting people. It's really, it's a shame to see how much things have declined because it is such a unique artisan experience that if more people were able to experience it, I think more people would be open to wearing, like they would have a true understanding of like the story of fur.
Yeah. Now, when you have to defend like the fur trade, the fur institute industry, what arguments do you generally give people?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what angle they're coming at us on, I
Okay.
guess is probably the best way to put it. If they're coming at us about trapping is inhumane and we shouldn't, that's terrible, then I talk about the fact that we've invested, $40 million over the last 40 years to, uh, you know, research traps, develop traps, build better traps. So that was really the Fur Institute started in the boom days of the fur business back in the 80s. We had 10 or 12 different national associations for fur in Canada.
Okay.
There's Canada Mink Breeders Association, Canada Fox Breeders Association, Fur Council of Canada, the Retail Fur Council of Canada, the Retail
Wow.
Furriers Guild, Skin Dealers of Canada, Skin Dealers of Quebec, some others probably that I'm missing off the top of my head. And the Fur Institute was this little side project that was developed by Canada's wildlife ministers and the fur industry to research and develop traps, because there was a lot of rabble rousing going on in Europe at the time about trapping and banning fur that came from trapping.
Wow.
So it was like, okay, let's get ahead of this. And there was some work that was going on already between the feds and the provinces, and they said, let's spin this off into a standalone organization. And just over the years since, as those 10 or 12 organizations have each kind of blinked out of existence, we've taken on their mandate as kind of everything flows downhill to us because we're
Wow.
still here.
So you guys are quickly becoming like the national, or might be.
Yeah. So last year, the Fur Council of Canada, which had been around since the 60s, they represented like the manufacturing and retail side of fur.
Okay.
They were a member of the Institute. The Institute was a member of the council. We worked closely together, but they got to a point where, as an organization, they could no longer stay independent. So I negotiated with the board of the Fur Council that they would fold the organization and invite all of their members to come join the Institute, and that the Institute would then represent from, trap line to runway, farm gate to showroom
Okay.
in the fur business. So in Canada. So, when people come at us about trapping, I can say we've got an international agreement, the Agreement on Internationally Humane Trapping Standards between us, European Union, and Russia. It has very particular conditions for trapping of certain species and what makes it humane or not humane. So
Okay. So this research and work is going towards making sure like the traps are effective, humane.
absolutely, yeah. So
Amazing.
that's really what it is at its core. And the irony of talking about how the other side of our debate isn't interested in actually collaborating with us in any way, shape, or
Mhm.
form, is the first kind of point person for the Fur Institute back in 1983, Neil Jotham, was the executive director of the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies.
Oh,
Like
that's
he
interesting.
came from the animal welfare
The animal
world,
welfare organization.
and like at that point there was still like a meaningful conversation to be had about animal welfare. It wasn't
Mhm.
just about animal rights, it was animal welfare. How do we make things
Yeah.
better for animals? So we had
Yeah.
different animal welfare organizations over the year as a part of and supporting the Fur Institute in our work.
Okay.
And then just over time they got more and more extreme, and eventually they all left. So if that's the angle they're coming at us, that's what I talk about. If they come at us that fur is a luxury item and we shouldn't be killing animals for just to create fancy looking coats for millionaires or whatever it
Yeah.
is they say, then I talk about the fact that high fur prices benefit farmers and trappers. They benefit small rural remote communities
It's
that
feeding the
you know
economy.
it feeds the economy in many communities, remote indigenous communities. It is or has been the largest cash infusion into the communities is the money from trapping. So for a lot of communities, they've been really hurt by the downturn in the fur industry and downturn in the seal industry. In some cases, communities, after the European Union banned white coat seal products in the 80s, communities in Labrador lost 30 to 40% of their community-wide income.
Wow, that is a huge hit.
Yeah, like that's a startling number. And certainly we can point to similar downturns in other parts of the country, in the boreal forest, for remote reserves in northern Ontario or northern Saskatchewan. Pick your spot. That as fur prices decreased, we saw very unfortunate things happening in those communities because there was no longer this source of cash, and no longer this industry that drew on traditional knowledge and traditional practices. uh, in a lot of ways it's similar conversations about like hunting outfitting operations,
Mhm.
both here and I do a lot of international work as well. I'm the vice chair of the International Council on Game and Wildlife Conservation, of
Awesome.
their Indigenous people and local communities working group. So I work a lot with folks in sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia,
Wow.
and talking about the impact on communities that taking away this cash infusion, and the fact that cash equals boats, cash equals snow machines, cash equals gas and bullets, and that then gives communities the ability to reinforce their own food security and
Mm.
hunt and camp and steward traditional territories. That's the stuff that starts to really throw a lot of well-meaning leftists. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Not everybody who disagrees with me is evil, just most of them.
No, for
But
sure.
the reality being that when you start to break down, here are the real impacts, the real fundamental and concrete impacts on communities. Then they go, well, wait a minute, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's so easy to just say, the fur trade is bad because you kill an animal, you skin it, and oh my God, that's horrific. But
Yeah,
they don't think past that.
yeah. And
And
they're
to
like,
make
oh,
it
you
that
don't eat
evil,
it. They're like, you don't eat it, so it's bad. I'm like, well, how much there's plenty of animals we eat that we don't use the
we don't use the hide
we
or
don't use the
anything.
hide from or use the feathers from. I
Mhm.
don't know a whole lot of people with Canada Goose stuffed pillows.
No,
So it's
no.
you're putting a focus on one part of the animal over another.
One waste to another.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally.
muskrat, I'm told, is good eating. Beaver's good eating.
Mhm.
There
I've
is
heard.
a food element to some of this. I'm not going to eat a mink. wild or
Okay.
farmed. there's certain animals that are very much, survival situation only.
Yeah,
Um,
totally understand that.
but
And I guess it would contribute to population control as well, because when you touched on muskrat, I'm thinking people used to hunt muskrat for fur around me. They don't
yep.
anymore. And now there's so many muskrats, farmers pay people to go and, take care of them because
Oh yeah.
they're clogging up the tile drains, like they're destructive.
Yeah, well, this is the thing when people come at me with the argument of we can end trapping. We can never end trapping. We can end the commercial fur industry. I
Hmm.
don't think we should, but it could happen that
Hmm.
we would end the commercial fur industry. Same way we ended the commercial whaling industry, same way at times we have ended the commercial seal industry. It's possible,
Yeah,
but it
not a
won't.
good idea.
But it's not a good
Possible.
idea. Um, because, and we've seen this from, we have examples of this in Europe, where, last year France killed more fur bearers than Canada did.
Really?
They have invasive muskrat, invasive mink, invasive fox. They kill hundreds of thousands of fur bearers every year in France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain. We collaborate with some of these countries to make sure that they're using humane traps
Oh, good.
in
Okay.
their population control exercises. But all of those animals are going to the landfill or the incinerator
Because it's only population control. They
because
can't
it's
use it
only for
for.
population control purposes. So you never get rid of trapping.
So
There will
these
always be reasons to trap animals.
So I wonder if these anti trappers, anti fur, realize that these animals are still going to die.
Yeah.
We're just not going to use their fur.
Well, and then the perverse part of it is when that happens. Like right now, I will say a significant portion of, I won't say all of the cost of, trapping of animals for infrastructure protection, wildlife protection, what have you. A significant portion of that cost is borne by the global fashion industry. The people that are buying the coats and buying the bags and buying the accessories, they're paying in certain cases for, beavers that would have flooded a intersection in town, or
Yeah.
muskrats that were burrowing out under the pilings of a bridge, or coyotes or wolves that were killing sheep. There's a certain portion of that cost that is being borne by voluntarily by the international fashion garment and accessories industry.
That's true.
Without that cost will be entirely borne by the taxpayer and the farmer.
Yeah. That's another huge, huge point, I think, for
So like,
sure.
that's the scary part. We're the amount of money that CN and CP and Manitoba Hydro and Hydro One and other power generators spend per year on animal control, on wildlife management
Yeah.
is still fairly large. But if we were at a point where muskrats were going for $10 each or $15 each, they probably wouldn't have to pay a whole lot of money for muskrat control.
That's so true. Yeah. Because muskrat's like not worth a whole lot now, right?
No, I mean muskrat's worth almost nothing right now,
Wow.
unfortunately. Coyotes, during the boom of coyotes, 10 years ago when Canada Goose was still using coyote fur, and that 900 companies that made knockoffs of Canada Goose were all using coyote on
Yeah.
their ruffs. There weren't a whole lot of farmers in the prairies who had to pay trappers, because
Oh,
trappers
yeah.
knew they could get $100 or $150 for each one of them coyotes. They were going to farmers begging for access to their land. Now that a good, a great western coyote is going for $40 or $50, I'm sure there's a lot of farmers in the prairies that are having to pay trappers to come in to keep coyotes off their sheep or off their cows or what have you. So if we can let rich people pay for all these things because they want a
Well,
nice
why
coat,
not?
that's great.
Yeah, exactly. It benefits everybody. Like,
Yeah, if we could distribute that cost to people who will voluntarily shoulder it,
yeah,
and that then supports trappers and supports, the auction house in North Bay, and supports dressers and dyers and supports manufacturers, all through the value chain. That's the best case scenario for everybody.
definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it's true what you said. I know people that used to trap or had family that trapped and they just don't anymore because they're like, it's not worth it.
Yeah. Or like we're also going through, and the States has already gone through this for the most part, and it's starting here in Canada as well, is people that are trappers for like personal wildlife management reasons. That
Okay.
they want to trap raccoons on their property because they want more turkeys, or they want to
Yeah.
trap foxes for more partridge, or insert trap small animal for save smaller animal, or if you're getting out west, trapping wolves for elk purposes, stuff like
Yeah.
that. In the States, that's in certain parts of the States anyway, that's the predominant reason people trap.
Okay.
And if any of their stuff makes it to the market, some of
Great.
it great, some of it does, some of it doesn't. But that's starting here. When I did my trapper ed course here in Nova Scotia last year, there were a few guys in the room that they said, my interest is predator control.
Okay.
And a few other guys that were like, my interest is, animal damage control, that I can do this and then go get my nuisance wildlife officer ticket, and then, make a bit of extra cash on the side from the municipality.
Okay.
That they'll all be on the list, and the municipality can call me and I can go, take beavers out of a culvert or something. Instead of, 20 years ago or 40 years ago, everybody in that room, well, why do you want to be a trapper? Well, I want to put up fur.
Mm-hmm. There's money in it, right?
Yeah, there's money in it. There's a reason to do this, and the reason is dollars and cents. And the other stuff is tertiary. The animal damage control stuff is like, oh, it's bonus. Wolves are worth a couple $100, and bonus on top of that is then there's no wolves to eat my elk.
Yeah, exactly. It's predator control paired with the actual fur.
Yeah, it was like it was a great way to float the cost of all of these other things.
Definitely. Dang, that was very educational. I feel like we're running out of time, but we're probably going to have to record again at some point because this is just there's just so much that people don't know about the fur side and the seal side and the trapping side.
Well, and the one thing that I've been trying to make an effort to do, especially in the 2.5 years I've been at the Institute, is trappers are the unloved stepchild of the outdoors community, right?
Yeah.
That, we're kind of off in our own corner, doing our own thing, and you might give us a call if you got wolves knocking down your elk herd or something, but it's not as, and some of our provincial associations are doing great jobs of building really strong relationships with outfitters associations and others, and I would like us to get to the point where we're shoulder to shoulder on a lot of these issues with the broader hunting, broader outdoors community, and that we can get past some of the ground level conflicts which are inevitable between any user groups.
Absolutely.
Same as conflict between outfitters and resident hunters, or resident hunters from over here and resident hunters from over there, or
anybody against anybody.
Anybody against anybody, exactly. So that's something that things like the outdoor symposium that Blaine puts on is a great opportunity to do that.
Yes, you can make those connections.
To get in a room with a bunch of other organizations from across the country and say, hey, we're here now.
Yep. No, definitely. It's just getting the name out there and raising the awareness. And I mean, all of these organizations, we've all got, very, very similar end goals, very similar ways of operating and thinking. So,
I would love us to get to a point where all we have left are the couple little things we disagree on, because we've already accomplished all the things we agree on.
Exactly. And I mean, I feel like the small things that organizations might disagree on aren't really that big of a deal.
No, that
So,
that's what I mean. Is like if we ever get to the point of having accomplished the 98.5% of other
yeah,
things that we all agree on,
then
and
that
all that
is
was left was the 1.5, then we would all be. I think we would all happily have that debate at that point, because
totally.
we'd be sitting on a long list of successes.
Yeah, that would be nice one day.
Someday,
Maybe.
we'll give it a couple years.
Yeah. I say 3 years. We'll get there. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This is amazing. Like so helpful. And yeah, I really hope that I know I got a lot out of this conversation. I'm almost certain anyone listening will. um, anything you want to leave us off with, and where can we find you online?
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave folks with the best thing you can do to support wildlife management is buy a fur coat.
Mm, I will.
And if you care about the oceans, buy some seal products. But and if you're looking for how and where to do that, you can find out at fur.ca or canadiansealproducts.com. Find us we're the Fur Institute of Canada, or maybe just Fur Institute of Canada on Instagram. We've started getting our Instagram presence back up and running in the last couple
Awesome.
months. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Where else are we? We have a podcast, the Truth About Fur podcast.
I want to check that podcast out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can find that in the Hunter Conservationist feed at Blood Origins Canada. So it's us
Oh,
and
cool.
Mark, myself and Mark Hall. We're the co-hosts of it over at Blood Origins Canada, and we're about once a month right now, and kind of just talking about the news of the day in fur and what the Institute is doing, what's in the news, what we think about it. And, there's a bit of science, a bit of politics, a bit of interesting stuff that's going on. So if folks have an hour to spare after they listen to the Horrible People podcast, they can check out Truth About Fur.
I love it. I'm gonna put all of those links in the little description section, so
Great.
people will be able to go right over there and find you.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.